welcome to the Yellow Chair Collective. We are a psychotherapy practice based in Los Angeles. My name is Jack Lamb. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an outreach coordinator and an associate therapist at Yellow Chair Collective. So since we're focusing this season on relationships, we could not go without making this episode about sex and sexual wellness. And I am so excited to have both of our guests here today. So first off, we have Dr. Rica Cruz. Dr. Rica Cruz is a sexologist, a sex educator, and media personality in the Philippines. And she is the CEO and founder of Unprude, the first stage-sensitive sex store. Her expertise and published work is focused on Filipino sexual behaviors and sexual pleasure. Dr. Rica has made it her life's work to help Filipino women embrace their sexual selves on their own terms. The other guest that we have on here today is my dear friend, Trish Bautista, who is an entrepreneur and creative based in both Los Angeles and Manila, Philippines, and is the COO and co-founder of Unprude. As a Filipino immigrant in the US, she is passionate about Filipino and AAPI sexual and reproductive health. So welcome, and feel free to share how you came into getting involved with sexual wellness and sexual education.
Hi, Jack. Thank you for that very nice introduction. So yes, I'm Dr. Rica Cruz. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am a sex and relationships therapist foremost, and I'm the CEO and founder of Unprude, and we're running it with Trish, right? And yes, you're right. Unprude is about sexual wellness and education. And also, my life is about sexual wellness and education. And how did that come? How did that come to be? It was because I was raised in a very strict Catholic family. And in the Philippines, we really do not talk about sex. There's no such thing as sex education. There's no such thing as, talking about contraception, nothing. Sex is very taboo. No one talks about it. And because that was the case, I had to navigate it by myself growing up. So during puberty, you had all those hormones. And during that process, I taught myself what sex is. But of course, I went through a lot of negative consequences. I'm trying to find a word. I'm trying to find the word to describe it, because I was teaching myself. I would talk to my friends about sex. I would try to find out what I want about it, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what sexually transmitted infections are, etc., etc. And in that process, I was also shamed by my peers and my family. It was difficult, but I was able to figure it out on my own. And when I became a mother to my daughter, I said I didn't want her to go through what I went through, because it was challenging navigating the world of sex without proper guidance. So I pursued education and research on sexual behavior, so I can accurately and properly educate my child about it. How about you, Trish?
Cool. Yeah, I'll jump in. Again, I'm Trish Bautista. I was actually born and raised in the Philippines. I moved to LA when I was 18. And growing up, I was raised by all women. So, my single mom, aunts, anyone that could help, nuns. I went to an all-girls Catholic school in the Philippines. My teachers were all women, all-girls school. So I was really empowered by these women to be educated. But ironically, I think being in a conservative society, being in a conservative Catholic school for 13 years, there was a lot of conflicting messaging about, how I don't own my body. So on one hand, I'm really, I'm fueled and empowered to be successful in career, as a woman. But on the other hand, there's these other contexts of conflicting messages. Yeah, and these have serious consequences that I'm, of course, still learning and unlearning many years later. So through that process, I really kind of have this multifaceted view, as I know many women do in the Philippines and in Asia, this kind of relationship with my identity as a woman, as an Asian woman, and now having moved to the US, I feel like that also added another layer to it. So that's really how I grew into kind of being involved with sexual wellness and, in this field.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think I am so almost excited to kind of dig into what y'all both mean by kind of negative consequences because there was that long pause and I was like, okay. And I think one of the things that I picked up on was kind of the lack of sex ed, right, growing up and not being able to access this information and having to do so on your own and then leading to the negative consequences, right? And I remember I grew up in Malaysia, and I remember our sex ed was literally just, I think they showed us figures of the quote unquote male and female body, and then they said, so these are all the areas that are off limits to touch. So don't touch the genitals, don't touch the breasts, don't touch the hands, and don't touch the mouth. And so it was just black
Oh
bars over it.
no.
It's more like what, it's not even what you could do, but it's just what not to do, and you figure out the rest.
Yes, very that.
Don't touch. Don't touch.
Off limits. Everything is off limits. Just don't do any
Oh,
of this and
no.
you'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Personally, for me, like I said, I was raised in a Catholic school. Of course, the Philippines is a largely very Catholic country and conservative. So growing up, I think this blend of being in this type of school system and also being in this culture, there's a lot of messaging on like what not to do, like what you said, and like what your relationship should be with your body. And the main message is that it's not yours, essentially. It's yours to keep safe because it's your best gift to your husband in the future.
Oh, wow.
Your virginity basically is your best gift to your husband in the future. So you would hear this literal verbatim messaging from when you're like 11, things like that. And that's not, of course, unique to one school. This is kind of culture at large. I remember we would have assemblies at the start of every school year to talk about this year that's to come, what to expect. But really what's highlighting that is like, what are the rules? Here's the rules. We're reminding you of them. No boys, stay virgins, essentially, without saying those actual words because we don't talk about sex. We would even do an oath to stay virgins, like literally raise our right hand. I forget the wording. Of course, it was religious driven, but I'm sure Doc Rica knows very well of these things. So, that's what we would hear every year. And it was like really 13 plus years of that. So a lot of it was very fear driven. So of course we would be educated on biology and reproductive system and all of that. But in terms of sex and pleasure, of course, we don't even talk about pleasure, but a lot of it was really fear-based. Contraception, for example, I remember we were all called to the gym. I think we were in about 5th grade or something. I think there was an organization that came to the school to talk about sexual education. But really what it was is how sex will make you pregnant. And even if you do everything in your power, like use a condom, you can get this, you can get that, you can get pregnant, which is all true, right? But of course, there was that obvious angle of fear. Basically, don't do it. Not that that stops anyone, really. But Doc Rica, I don't know if that's probably very common, right? This isn't unique to me.
Oh, yeah, very common, especially here in the Philippines, because this is a predominantly Catholic country, right? But I didn't go to Catholic school. I only went to a Catholic school during my kinder or prep nursery, prep, somewhere there.
Mm.
And what I remember is that they would teach us that we cannot have crushes, yes, and that we cannot have anyone on our left side. So we should just be, it's so weird, girl. We should just be walking by ourselves and there should be no one on our left side because the left side is the devil. I'm like,
oh, wow.
I was like, what, 5 years old, 6 years old? We cannot use the left hand too. So because the devil is on the left side. So anyway, going back to sex, right?
Yeah.
But it's so weird because it was during that time when I was in that Catholic school that I had my first crush because we were co-ed. The nurseries were like co-ed, and then I remember he was so poggy. It's poggy in English. He was so handsome.
Yes.
And he was 6 years old. So cute, so cute. I remember him. I still remember his name, Aaron.
Shout out, Erin.
Shout out to Erin. Erin, if you're listening,
I
it's
just
time to reach
remembered
out.
his name. I know, right? But yeah, so I did my elementary school in a non-sectarian school in the Philippines. There's no religion. But because my family is like, of course, Catholic, and my dad was supposed to be a priest, that's the kind of person he is. He also like goes to church morning and evening. He is very strict about these things. And to the extent that we weren't allowed to have boyfriends, we weren't allowed to have crushes or like boy friends that are boys. And because I was a very curious kid, um, I had to, again, like what I said, I had to find out for myself. And finding out for myself means I had to get myself my first boyfriend. Right?
You have to.
Yes, yeah. I was a very horny child. Like I couldn't understand what was going on with my body. And I was attracted to a guy. So yeah, I had to get myself my first boyfriend. Unfortunately, my parents found out. And when they found out, they also found out that I already had my first sexual debut. So the moment they found out, I was like 12. I remember my mom got me and then she took me to the washroom and had a pregnancy test. She gave me a pregnancy test and said, take it. And then when my dad found out, we were in the car. He almost hit the car. He's so angry. He almost hit the car. He said, "What kind of future are you gonna have? What kind of a woman are you? You're done, etc., etc." But of
Wow.
course, I know he was just saying it because he was angry. Um, but that was a kind of like values that they were trying to instill to Filipino children before. And after that, because I'm still very insistent and curious, even after that happening to me and finding out that my first boyfriend cheated on me, uh,
Oh
I
no.
had to get myself another boyfriend.
Trash. Just
Another
kidding.
boyfriend. Yeah. And of course, I used sex to really find out who I was, maybe find out, um, look for affection or just figure out what it means to me as a person, as a teenager, maybe as a young adult. And I had multiple sexual partners to the extent that, okay, you were asking about negative consequences, to the extent that I had to rush myself to the ER because I couldn't sit anymore. And I was like, my fever was at the 40s, and I couldn't sit. It was so painful to pee. And when I went to the ER, they found out that my Bartholin's gland was already inflamed, and they had to rush me to get general surgery to get it out. And my
Oh,
mom, I was so cool. I was so cool because the anesthesiologist was my best friend's mom, and she found out. Of course, I didn't tell my best friend, right? Like one of my best friends, I didn't tell her, and she just found out through her mom. Like, hey, Rica's at the hospital. We're doing surgery. It's crazy. And then another thing that I had to go through because of like these, curiosity, is that I had, well, abortion is illegal in the Philippines, but I got pregnant at the age of 18, 19, I believe, and I had to take whatever I could, like whatever they're selling in the streets of Manila, and I had to let go of the baby by myself at a motel. It was painful.
oh
I'm
my
laughing
god.
now as I say it because it doesn't really matter me. It doesn't really like affect me that much now. It's a funny story when I think about it, but of course I wouldn't want my daughters to go through that. That's like hell. So maybe that those are like those mm, those instances motivated me more to really push to find out about sex and really to advocate sexual wellness and sexual education because I don't want anyone else going through that. But even if I say this now, a lot of women are still going through the same thing that I went through. It's just that I guess I'm privileged. I'm lucky that my parents did not disown me even after, or like I was able to afford proper care after, but it still doesn't justify going through these experiences, right?
A lot of women don't have support. I mean,
Oh
you were
yeah,
very alone. That's why you had to go to a motel. You had to go to the ER and ran into your best friend's mom without her even knowing.
yeah,
And a lot of
yeah.
children are disowned, because of these things. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
It was scary. It was scary because, like what you said, yes, I felt alone because I couldn't tell anyone because these people would just say, "Ah, you're you did that to yourself. You chose to be sexually active. You chose to sleep around. So figure that out by yourself." That's how I was thinking then.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine how scary it must have been to be pregnant at that age, knowing that abortion is illegal, knowing that you have to figure it out by yourself, in addition to kind of, as you mentioned, the stigma and without parental support. And it seems like with friends, it was also really hard to talk about sex and
Mhm.
sexual wellness.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel that those are the reasons that got me into sex therapy. Because in the process of learning about sex and learning, how to help people who had who have sexual issues or who had a traumatic past based on sex, I was also healing myself.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that you were able to kind of take away something like that from something so traumatic as going through that. And, I really did not think this is where it would have went when you had mentioned negative consequences. Now I feel like that's a very light term for what you had went through.
Yeah, we said it like it was like a little oopsie.
Yeah, like a
There's more, but yeah.
Scraping the surface.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But yeah, I do not regret anything, but I wouldn't wish it upon anyone else.
I think it highlights how important it is, right? Especially now I'm in the US, there's, of course, a lot of conversation right now around abortion rights and how much something like this that could seem so abstract to so many people in reality and in practice can really, really, really have such a huge impact on individual lives. And, I want to also kind of give space for Trish because I know you had your experiences where you talked about negative consequences in your life about not being able to access proper sexual education as well.
Yeah. Well, for me, actually, I would say I'm lucky to not have had a lot of negative medical consequences. And I think I'll actually share some positive experiences. So I mentioned that I was raised in almost like if you remember Wonder Woman and how they were like in this utopia of like feminine energy and how they're all raised, yeah, amongst women. I feel like that's how my upbringing was, not thinking about it. So my mom was a very strong figure in my life, of course, being a single mom. And this, I know you mentioned negative consequences, but I'll start with a positive because I felt like, this was the education that was available to us in the society. And she truly, enrolled me into like what she thought was, in the best environments, which I do agree. It's just like kind of what we have at the time. So for me, I felt like in my household we didn't really talk about sex per se, but I'm very lucky that as I grew older, my mom and I were more open to it. As I moved here, as I became a young adult, I was more open to her, and that's a very strong contrast from, I would come home to that, but then I would go to school and go out into the world with a different environment. So I was kind of, I would say that really helped me become more informed and more careful. I was really scared of pregnancy growing up. So I didn't engage in penetrative or heterosexual sexual intercourse. So I actually had experiences with girls growing up, and that's how I would say that I really found my sexuality. And I was around like 13 years old, and 14, and no one really around me was talking about that in school, like sexual experiences. It was like wild when my friends would kiss other guys or girls or whomever. That level was already kind of, the rumors would get around. What more if they had found out that I was involved in sexual interactions. So no one around me was really, at least in my knowledge, involved sexually at the age that I was, in the context that I was. But I think because I was in the confines of safe sex, safe in terms of pregnancy, because I was discovering my early sexuality with girls, I was kind of not too worried about that. Although it was just worries with authority, morality, because growing up you think that that's wrong, you're going to get caught, you might get expelled from school. And I was I was flagged a few times, and that really affects, if you care about your standing, your grades and all that stuff, that does affect your markings in school, and could affect going into college and things like that. Thankfully that didn't happen for me, but that's what I would watch out for, right? So getting caught, you could get kicked out, or my family finding out as well. That wasn't something that I had talked about. So I think consequences for me was just relationships with family that I feel like could have been better if I felt safer to open up to them more. Because then as a result, as a teenager, I had my relationships with my first girlfriends, and I had to lie about that stuff. And my sister would find out, but my mom didn't, and that kind of made us really drift apart. There's a lot more detail to that, that are kind of more family related, but that's, to me, I feel like I wish I could have been more open to my family, because that really hurt a lot of my relationships in my young adulthood, and years of not talking to family because of events about getting caught with a girl and how that's not allowed and things like that. Sorry, I'm like being vague. It sounds like I'm being vague, but to me it was really more relational, I think the consequences were.
Yeah, no, I think both of your stories really help paint this picture of how much fear there is in terms of approaching anything like sexual in nature. And to me, right, as someone who hasn't interrogated as much of my like early sexual experiences, and now more so coming from the perspective of like, well, this is my body, right, like personal autonomy, it almost, listening to this almost makes me feel like something so personal to you, your own like your own identity as a sexual being and your sexual behavior, something so personal and private feels so surveilled, in the sense of like, if people found out, there would be such negative consequences, right? I think that illuminates a little bit more about like what those negative consequences are, like even being flagged or marked down for that, like that seems so intrusive to me, right? Like from this perspective. And
Yeah.
I think that's why it's amazing to hear about the work that y'all are doing at Unprude with what y'all have called, I guess, stage sensitive sex. And that's kind of where I wanted to like pivot a little bit. If you could kind of share a little bit about, what are sexual stages, and how do, people develop more like sexual awareness?
All right. So I'll take this, Trish. Because sexual stages actually came from my years of studying sexual behaviors and talking to women in the Philippines about their sexual journeys. And one of my biggest studies is creating a theory on Filipino women's sexual pleasure, because I really wanted women to know that we experience pleasure and that we have the right to pleasure. So during interviewing these women, I found out that, of course, everyone's experiences are unique, like how Trish and my experiences are different. But we generally go through a similar process in our sexual journey, and it's changing, it's ever changing, and it's ever evolving. And sexual stages are phases or junctures in a person's sexual journey that influences their relationship with sex and their sexual self, their sexuality. And from my research, we have determined 4 sexual stages, and these are careful, curious, conflicted, and craving. Now, it's important that we do not see these stages as linear, because you can jump around stages, right? They're like waves or they're like spirals. Doesn't matter. As long as they're not linear. And I found out that when we know where we are, like which stage we are in our sexual journey, it gives us more sexual awareness. And, you're a therapist, right? And it gives us more ownership of our bodies. So the awareness leads to understanding, and it leads to ownership of our bodies. Because when we understand our sexual stages, it's when we begin to completely accept ourselves and love ourselves for wholly who we are, and be comfortable with, yeah, our the sexual side of ourselves. Because remember, growing up, we were taught that we cannot be sexual. So
Right.
what we want to happen now is to be comfortable with the sexual side of ourselves, be able to accept it and embrace it, because this is a very big and important part of who we are. And only then will we be able to really say that, hey, we love ourselves, we accept ourselves, and we care for ourselves. And loving ourselves means we are intentional about exploring and pursuing what makes us feel good, right? Because pleasure is a right, but we were deprived of that. And what we're saying is that when we love ourselves, we're okay with our pleasures. We are comfortable with, looking at sex as how it really is and how important it is in our bodies and our whole beings. And knowing knowing this means our relationships with ourselves and even with others comes from a place of want. It's intentional rather than a place of need, like how I did it before, which led to these negative consequences,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
it was from a place of need to find out. But if it's a want, because you know who you are as a sexual person, then you will be more intentional, you will be more careful, and you will be more understanding of who you are as a person and who others are too. And now exploring sex will not come from a place of like fear or like, rebelling, but it comes from a place of curiosity and respect for yourself and for others. I hope I made sense.
No, yeah, I love that. I think that's amazing. Like the word that came to mind as you were kind of explaining that is that it sounds so empowering, right? In the sense of, when you said, especially I think the words that rang for me were ownership and pleasure, because I think throughout the narratives that you've shared, like pleasure wasn't even mentioned, right? Like there is not even any kind of education or mention about pleasure being a part of sex. And then ownership kind of stuck with me too, especially with your anecdote around like the greatest gift a woman can give her husband as her virginity, right? Like that inherently, I feel like implies to me like, well, that's not you're not in control of your body, right? And to have ownership over that feels so almost radical.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so excited, to have both of y'all here to share this. And for anyone listening, I know you've articulated the 4 stages, but can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what each stage, maybe like a brief summary of like what each stage kind of sounds like or looks like?
Yeah, Trish, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do
You
that.
want me to take this? Sure. Yeah, we talk about this all day, every day at Unprude. So, the whole point, like you said, is ownership. And each stage is not going to be, may or may not be your stage, right? You're not going to know really how long you're going to be in that place in your sexual journey, but the point is that you are there and you are at peace with it. So, right, it's careful, curious, conflicted, and craving in no particular order. So the careful stage is where someone may feel the most kind of scared or nervous for what they might be discovering. So typically, if you're in the beginning stages, this is typically where you might be. If you're feeling intimidated, exploring your sexual self, and you need reassurance and care, then that might be the careful stage is where you might be at. On the other hand, the curious stage is when you're, ready to experience all the different ways that sex could mean to you. So you are willing and eager to explore and to find, understand, and define your sexual self, and explore the different ways that you can feel pleasure in your body. This is when you're not necessarily in the mechanics of things and you're really in the getting to know you stage, happily in the getting to know you stage of yourself and your sexual identity. And this could mean, different things for different people. As for all of the stages, someone could be in the curious stage and not be having sexual intercourse, or having a lot of sexual intercourse, right? It really depends on the person, but it's just really defined by, curiosity, eagerness, willingness to explore. And the third stage is conflicted. I think we really all go through in some way or form, through a conflicted stage. It's when there's confusion, fear, maybe even exhaustion that takes over the excitement of pleasure of sex. This could be, someone who has a lot of responsibilities in the moment. So when someone is, let's say, a new mom and has a lot of responsibilities, a new parent, or is in grad school and is under a lot of stress in a new high demand job, or even because of certain relationships that put you in a state of confusion or frustration. So it's really having some sort of frustration that defines kind of your sexual identity in the moment. You may be in the conflicted stage. And our point in including this is that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. And everybody goes through this, and it's in these little ways that we truly find our sexual identities. I think we can all agree that we live in a world that has put limitations on our bodies and our sexual identities. So naturally, we're all going to be in the conflicted stage in one way or another, unless you're in some sort of utopia, right? Maybe someday we won't go through this anymore. But our whole point in including this and in defining this is so that everybody can understand and recognize that this exists, this is okay, and it's part of the journey. And, moving on from that, we then have the craving stage. This is where your lust to know yourself and kind of your burning passion to experience sort of your full potential is undeniable, right? This is when you find yourself the most confident in your body and your desires, and you're really owning and pursuing your desires, and embracing and really harnessing the power of your being. For women, your womanhood. So, these are the 4 stages essentially. And like Doc Rica mentioned, you can start on one stage and be on the next in no particular order, and all of it is okay. Every stage could look different for everybody. And what's important is that you just acknowledge where you're at. And it is in this full understanding that equips you with the power to make informed decisions and to know that it's all going to be okay.
Wow. I love that. Thank you so much for laying it all out. I think one of the things that it makes me think of is how expansive, right, this experience is, because we all have a relationship with our sexual selves, and we all kind of go through stages that you've mentioned. I mean, even as you were reading it out, I was like, oh yeah, I feel like I've been there. Like, I know what that feels like.
Which stage are you now?
I think it's really conflicted, to be honest, because when you said exhaustion, I was like, that's me. That's where I am.
It's all about recognizing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think how powerful this is to me is kind of like something about when you first began talking about your stories of how taboo sex is and how hard it is to talk about sex. This kind of gives a language to even talk about it, right? To kind of validate that what I am experiencing, what I'm going through, it's normal, it's named, it's something that, you know, is unique to me still, but also something that everyone experiences at some point, right? I'm not alone, I'm not faulty or wrong for kind of experiencing these things, because I think a lot of the times, especially in an environment where there's a lot of shame, it can feel very wrong.
Exactly. I think I love what you said, that language really does have that power, you know, in naming these stages and naming really anything. I think it is really just an attempt, you know, to capture the complexity that is our sexual identity. It starts there. It starts somewhere, right? So I think language and recognizing these names is a really, I think, powerful tool for you then to take and define yourself and own it and translate it into what makes sense for you. And only you can do that.
Yeah. And, you know, I think one thing that I really am curious about, right, is Unprude is pretty still. When did y'all launch Unprude actually?
We're babies.
Like yesterday? When was that? Was it
No,
November?
November.
2021, yeah.
So yeah, we started it out. We had a soft launch around June, but of course, you know, a lot of things can happen. And then we launched November 2021.
Wow. And I did see photos of it. I thought it was amazing, very beautiful. And I'm so excited to hear more amazing things to come out from it. I think one of the things I'm curious about, as you've shared so many of your own stories and your vision for sexual wellness, is what kind of changes you would like to see, right? Either it could be for yourself, it can be for your community, or just the impact that you feel like you would like to kind of make for the sexual wellness and education landscape.
You know, it's so funny because when I started doing sex education, like teaching about sex, I told my students that, you know, I'm teaching you this so you can teach the next generation, because I don't feel that I'm going to see any impact of what I'm doing in my lifetime. It was so funny. I said that.
Wow.
That I don't think we can change the Philippines anytime soon. But it was amazing how people now are, you know, talking about sex more openly. More and more people are doing that. It's slowly, gradually, but we are moving, and I see it, and that's great. When I started Unprude, one of my KPIs, you know, because they taught me that you should have KPIs. I didn't have KPIs for myself. I'm just like, I want to do this and do that. I said, I want to see people going around the mall or going around with paper bags of Unprude. You know how you walk around with paper bags of Dior or Hermes and you just flaunt it, right? But if we can do that, it means that people are not ashamed anymore to be to walk around and say that, hey, I got something for my sexual self today. Does that make sense?
I could cry at that
Yeah,
vision.
that's my KPI for Unprude, really. It's just to see those paper bags
Wow.
going around. But a more theoretical and more, I guess, dream of mine would be for people to really start talking about sex from a space of, you know, love, care, curiosity, and respect. Not like when we hear people talk about sex, it's going to be, you know, shameful, or people will laugh, or people will tell you, hey, don't say that. There are a lot of people around listening. So I also want people to see sex as something not to avoid. So see it not as something to avoid, but something to welcome with a lot of interest and understanding. Because the more that we avoid sex, the more we are welcoming its negative consequences. And also to recognize sex as a key, not actually in hurting ourselves. Not sex will bring you negative consequences. I want to shift the mindset so that people will see sex as a key in learning to love and respect ourselves and others. That's it.
Wow. I love that.
We should trademark negative consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Trish?
Of course, I echo all of that. I think, to me, to kind of put it in a different way, the key is really, even for myself, in understanding your options, understanding yourself, and being at peace with who you are, whatever that looks like. And I think it's with that understanding that it's that love for yourself and that understanding for yourself that you're also able to extend that to others, right? I know it sounds cheesy, but it's truly, especially when you're coming from a space of judgment and really this topic of sex, the only way that you can understand others is if you kind of give that same grace to yourself and to myself, right? I still catch myself being honestly the judgmental towards things that I don't understand, that maybe I've never been exposed to or never encountered before. That is just like how others define their sexual selves, because it's not the way that I'm describing myself. So my goal for, the community is the same goal that I have for myself. Yeah.
I love that. I love all the things that you both shared. And, I think one of the things that I am thinking about right now, especially since I just came out of like a few client sessions, is, it's like I've had clients who have been talking to me about like sex and how much shame there still is, and not just about like the lack of sexual education and wellness, but also about what our expectations of someone who is in a partnership, right? Like how much sex should we be having? What does that mean if we're not having enough sex, quote unquote? Um, does that mean that we're not in love? Does that mean that this relationship is not healthy? So many things that are there's still so many, I think, myths and misconceptions around sex and sexual expectations that I think this fluid, beautiful framework that you've laid out and this kind of affirming message that you're sending out is so, so amazing to see. And so I think, of course. And of course, one of the last things I want to ask is for anyone who, is listening today, who might resonate with anything that you shared today, right? Whether that's suffering negative consequences because they didn't have sexual wellness or education, or someone who might be curious, right, to explore more sexual freedom for themselves and awareness for themselves. What is one helpful tip that you think you could offer, I guess?
Trish, you can go ahead.
Yeah, one helpful tip, just one. Hold on. Because on one hand, there's the philosophical, right? Like, always ask yourself kind of questions about why you think you're feeling that way about a sexual moment or a sexual encounter. If it's like with a partner and you're feeling resentment, or if it's with yourself and you're feeling frustration, I think just asking yourself where you think that's rooted in. I think the practical side of that is really therapy. I think I've learned a lot through my journey in therapy and the way that I view sex in questions that I would never have known to ask myself. So yeah, asking the right questions is really, to me, key. Yeah.
Okay.
Before, whenever someone would ask me this question, I would answer with, never fake your orgasms, or like stop faking your orgasms. Stop it. But now, if there's one helpful tip, Trish said therapy, and aside from that, I could invite people to go to unprude.com. Go to Unprude.
Yes, and that's where I want to end it today, because if you want to find out more information about Dr. Rica Cruz's work and the sexual stages, and to kind of explore more about what Unprude has to offer, please visit unprude.com. Is there anywhere else that they can find you? Anything else anywhere that you would like to kind of put out there as resources?
Oh, okay. For Filipino Americans listening to this podcast, I also have a podcast entitled "Conservative Ako." It translates to "I'm conservative," and it's really focused on helping Filipino women understand the sexual shame and guilt that we were conditioned with growing up, and for them to be able to unleash their inner sexy goddesses. That's what the podcast is about. I also have my Instagram. It's underscore Rica Cruz. So you can find, sexual content there and like things about my life. And of course, please do follow Unprude Official on Instagram, right, Trish?
Yes, and I do actually want a quick note. It's just really interesting that conservative means something so different in the U.S. versus in the Philippines, right, Jack? Conservative being very political in the U.S. Just wanted to know. Whereas in the Philippines, it's very much like it means sex, right? Like you are a proper woman.
I see. Thank you.
That's a lot about societies, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today. And I hope that I know that this is going to be something that everyone will resonate with.
Thank you, Jack. We had so much fun talking about this.